Among the objects in his study was a living chameleon in a box with a glass lid. The animal, which was about 6 inches long, was lazily dozing on a bed of sand, with a big blue fly, the unconscious provision for his dinner, perched upon his back. He has just been sent me from Smyrna, said Humboldt. He is very listless and unconcerned in his manner. Just then the chameleon opened one of his long tubular eyes and looked upon us. A peculiarity of this animal, he had continued, is its power of looking in different directions at the same time. He can turn one of his eyes toward the heaven, while the other inspects the earth. There are many clergymen who have the same power. After showing me some of the Hildebrand's watercolor drawings, he returned to his seat and began to converse about American affairs, with which he seemed to be entirely familiar. He spoke with great admiration of Colonel Fremont, whose defeat he profoundly regretted. But it is at least a most cheering sign, he said, and an omen of good for your country, that more than 500,000 of men, supported by their votes of men of Fremont's character and achievements, with regard to Buchanan. He said, I had occasion to speak of his Ostend Manifesto not long since in the letters which has been published, and I could not characterize its spirit by any milder term than savage. He also spoke of our authors, and inquired particularly after Washington Irving, whom he had once seen. I told him that I had the fortune to know Mr. Irving, and had seen him not long before leaving New York. He must have been at least 50 years old, said Humboldt. He is 70, I answered, but as young as ever. Ah, said he, I have lived so long that I almost lost the consciousness of time. I belonged to the age of Jefferson and Gallatin, and I heard of Washington's death while traveling in South America. I have repeated but the smallest portion of this conversation, which flowed on in uninterrupted stream of the richest knowledge. On recalling it to my mind after leaving, I was surprised to find out how great a number of subjects he had touched upon, and how many he had said, or seemed to have said, for he was the rare faculty of placing a subject in the clearest and most vivid light by a few luminous words concerning each. He thought, as he talked, without effort, I should compare his brain to the fountain of Valiquez, a still, deep, and tranquil pool, without a ripple on its surface, but creating a river by its overflow. He asked me many questions, but did not always wait for the answer. The question itself suggesting some reminiscence of some thought which he had evident pleasure in expressing. I sat or walked, following his movements, an eager listener, and speaking in alternate English or German, until the time which he had granted me had expired. Safet at length reappeared and said to him in a manner at once respectful and familiar, "It is time," and I took my leave. You have traveled much and seen many ruins, said Humboldt, as he gave me his hand again. Now you have seen one more. Not a ruin, I could not help replying, but a pyramid. For I pressed the hand which had touched those of Frederick, the Great of Foster, the companion of Captain Cook, of Klopstock and Schiller, of Pitt, Napoleon, Josephine, the marshals of the Empire, Jefferson, Hamilton, and Wieland, Herder, Goethe, Cuvier, Laplace, Gay-Lussac, Beethoven, Walter Scott, in short, of every great man whom therein, Walter Scott, in short, of every great man whom Europe has produced in 3/4 of a century. I looked into the eyes which had not only seen this living history of the world pass by, scene after scene, till the actors retired one by one to return no more, but had beheld the cataract of Atures and the forests of the Cassiquiare, Chimborazo, the Amazons, Popocatépetl, Antillean Alps of Siberia, the Tartar Steppes, and the Caspian Sea. Such a splendid circle of experience well befits a life of such generous devotion to science. I have never seen so sublime an example of old age, crowned with imperishable success, full of the ripest wisdom, cheered and sweetened by the noblest attributes of the heart. A ruin indeed, a human temple, perfect as the Parthenon. As I was passing out through the cabinets of natural history, Safet's voice arrested me. "I beg your pardon, sir," said he, "but do you know what this is?" Pointing to the antlers of a Rocky Mountain elk. "Of course I do. I have helped to eat many of them." He then pointed out the other specimens and took me into the library to show me some of the drawings by his son-in-law, Mulhausen, who had accompanied Louet Whipple in his expedition to the Rocky Mountains. He also showed me a very elaborate specimen of beadwork in a gilt frame. "This," he said, "is the work of a Kirghiz princess, who presented it to His Excellency when we were on a journey to Siberia." "You accompanied His Excellency, then?" I asked. "Yes," said he, "and we were there in 29. Safet is just proud of having shared for 30 or 40 years the fortunes of his master." There was a ring, and a servant came in to announce a visitor. "Ah, Prince Ypsilanti," said he. "Don't let him in, don't let him in. Don't let a single soul in. I must go and dress His Excellency. Sir, excuse me. Yours most respectfully," and therewith he bowed himself out, and I descended to the street. I passed Prince Ypsilanti on the stairs. In October of the following year, Mr. Taylor had a second interview with Humboldt, this time at Potsdam. "As I had business," he writes, "which detained me 4 days in Berlin, I sent a note to Humboldt asking permission to call upon him again, in case his time permitted the visit. The next day's express from Potsdam brought me to a most kind and friendly reply, welcoming me back to the Baltic Sand Sea, as he calls the Brandenburg Plain, and stating that although the Emperor Alexander and his suite were to arrive that evening, he would nevertheless take on an hour or two from the excitement of the court to talk to me about the North. He was residing in the palace at Potsdam, where he directed me to call at noon on Monday. The train by which I left Berlin was filled with officers and diplomatic officials in full uniform, going down to do homage to the Tsar. In the carriage in which I sat there were 2 old gentlemen who presently commenced conversing in French. After a time their talk wandered to the Orient, and they spoke of Dipstich and the campaigns, and the Treaty of Unkiar Ecclesi. Suddenly one of them asked in Arabic, "Do you speak Arabic?" The others answered in Turkish, "No, but I speak Turkish." The first replied in the same language, which after a time the two exchanged for modern Greek, and finally subsided into Russian. I made out that one was a Wallachian, but could discover nothing more, notwithstanding there was an air of secret mission about them, which greatly piqued my curiosity. With us was also a Prussian regimental surgeon, decorated with the Order of Saint House for his service in the Crimea. Potsdam was all alive with the imperial arrival. The King of Saxony was also coming to dinner, and that the three monarchs might be pleasantly diverted in the evening. The sparkling Marie Taglioni, who had arrived with us, tripped out of the cars and off to the Royal Theatre. The park at Sanssouci was in brilliant holiday trim, the walks newly swept and the fountains channeling their tallest and brightest streams. The streets of the little dull court town glittered with their splendid uniforms, among which the driver of my carriage pointed out Karl Albert and various other prisoners of the House of Prussia. As we were crossing an open space near the palace, a mountain guard, followed by an open carriage drawn by a span of superb black horses, suddenly appeared. I at once recognized the paunchy figure in a green military coat, buttoned up to the chin, who sat on the right band. Although I had never seen before His Majesty, my driver reined up on one side and took off his hat. I lifted mine as the king passed, looked at him, and he replied with a military salute. His face was slightly flushed, and his eyes bright, and I remember thinking that the heavy and rather stupid air which he wears in his portraits did him injustice. But he was even then perhaps laboring under the congestion which struck him down the same night, and from the effects which he will never recover. I was glad when the clock struck 12 at last, and I could leave the rattling streets for the quiet corner of the palace in which Humboldt lives. The door was opened, as before, by Sifat, who recognized me at once. "Welcome back," he cried. "We know where you have been. We have read all your letters. His Excellency has been quite sick, and you will not find him so strong as last year. But he is in tolerable health again, thank God. Come in, he is waiting." Opening the doors as he spoke, he ushered me into a little library on the threshold of which Humboldt, who had risen, received me. He was slightly paler than before, a little thinner perhaps, and I could see that his step was not so firm. But the pale blue eyes beamed as clear as intelligence as ever. And the voice had as steadily and cheery a tone. He shook hands with the cordiality of a friend, and after the first greeting was over, questioned me minutely concerning my travels in the north. But one topic suggests 100 others, and he was ere long roaming at large over the whole field of 20. Geography, climatology, touching the furthest and darkest regions of the earth with the light of his stupendous knowledge. The sheets of the new volume of Cosmos lay upon the table. "Here is what I have been doing since you were here before," said he, by taking it up. "The work will be published in 2 or 3 weeks. You find yourself, then, still capable of such labor?" I ventured to ask. "Work is now a part of my life," said he. "I sleep so little, and much rest would be irksome. Day before yesterday, I worked for 16 hours reviewing these sheets." "Are you not greatly fatigued?" I asked, "after such an excursion?" "On the contrary," he replied, "I feel refreshed, but the performance of it depends greatly on the state of bodily health. I am unconscious of any mental fatigue, as I saw in the face and heard in the voices of the splendid old man all the signs of a sound, unfailing intellect. I could well believe it. I had prided myself a little on having worked with the brain 15 hours a day for 60 months. Yet there was Humboldt in his 89th year, capable of equal exertion. The manner in which he spoke to me of his bodily health was exceedingly interesting to me. His mind, full of vigor and overflowing with active life, seemed to consider the body as something independent of itself, and to watch with a curious eye its gradual decay as he might have watched that of a life in his younger days. "I have been unwell through the summer," said he, "but you must not believe all you have seen in the New Year's papers concerning my illness. They stated that I was attacked with apoplexy, and it was only a vertigo, which soon left me, and was not been followed by any of the usual effects of apoplexy. One result, however, shows that my body is beginning to give way. I have not the same power of controlling my limbs as formerly. The will does not seem to act upon the muscles. There was a link broken somewhere, which it is probably too late to restore. For instance, very often, when I attempt to walk straight forward, I do not feel certain that my legs will carry me in a straight line. They may go either to one side or the other, and though I cannot notice any real want of strength, I feel uncertain and mistrustful for this reason. I must have assistance when I go up or down stairs. After all, it is not singular that some parts of the machinery should get rusty at my age." Soon afterward, while speaking of Tibet, he referenced a very old, fine copperplate map, and I noticed that he saw the most minute names distinctly, without the aid of spectacles. But then he has the eyes of a youth of 20 years of age, may palsy his limbs, but it was never looked out of those windows. After I had been sitting an hour, Seifert came to the door and said, "The two gentlemen have come. Shall I admit them?" I arose to leave, but Humboldt said, "No, no, remain. They are from Hong Kong. Perhaps you know them." I looked at the cards and recognized an acquaintance in the name of an editor of a Hong Kong paper. The other was a government official. After they entered, the conversation took a more general tone, but I was not sorry for this afterwards, as it gave Humboldt occasion to recall some scenes of his early life. One of the visitors spoke of Frederick the Great. "I remember him well," said Humboldt. "I was 16 years old when he died, and I can see his face still as plainly as I can see you. I was but 18 when I visited England for the first time. It was during the trial of Warren Hastings, which I frequently attended. I remember that I heard Edmund Burke, Pitt, and Sheridan all speak on the same night. I shall not repeat his account of the Congress of Verona, or his anecdotes of Alexander the First of Russia, whom he knew intimately, as I am not certain whether I have a right to do so at present. After the visitors left, I remained with him until it was time for him to prepare for dinner, given to Alexander II, to which he was bidden. "You will pass through Berlin on your way to Moscow," said he. "Yes. Well, I must be polite enough to live until then." "You must bring your wife with you." "Oh, I know all about it, and you must not think that, because I have never been married myself, that I do not congratulate you." After these cordial words and a clasp of the hand, in which there was nothing weak or tremulous, I parted from the immortal old man. I was glad to learn from Seifert that Hildebrand's admirable watercolor drawing of Humboldt in his library is soon to be printed in Cormant, so that very accurate copies of it can be obtained at a moderate price. As I have not only seen the original, but the room and the man that it represents, I can testify to its entire fidelity, and would suggest to its Humboldt admirers in America that they cannot procure a better illustration of him. I suppose copies of it will be sent to America for sale. Herr Mulhausen, Seyffert's son-in-law, who is now attached as an artist to the expedition of the survey of a wagon road to the Pacific, prepared for the press before leaving Berlin. A splendidly illustrated work at Gila Country, which is now being published under the patronage of the king. It will cost about $28 a copy. Humboldt himself wrote the preface of a copy of which he gave me. He was greatly gratified at the readiness with which our present Secretary of War gave Mr. Mulhausen a second appointment. Such was Alexander von Humboldt, author and traveler. As soon as he appeared to authors and travelers in the palace of his king, and his own quiet home, to the citizens of Potsdam and Berlin, all of whom knew him by sight, he appeared in a somewhat different light. For while many of them were ignorant of him as an author and traveler, or had at best a vague idea of his worldwide renown in this respect, none were ignorant of his rank as one of the king's privy councillors. Everybody knew His Excellency, the Baron von Humboldt, and honored him like the king himself. He was often seen at Potsdam, walking on the terrace of Sanssouci with His Majesty Frederick William IV, or sauntering by himself in the avenues of the park. One of his favorite haunts at Sanssouci was a shady walk in a retired part of the garden. He loved the spot because it reminded him of his friend, the former king, who was buried there. Frederick William III slept by his side of his queenly wife in the stately marble monument, the work of the sculptor Rausch. Upon this monument was a recumbent statue of His Majesty, with his martial cloak all around him.